if you look at Christianity, I think evidentially it stands quite far above the other religions. Otherwise I wouldn't be here, right? Why would I be here talking if I didn't believe that and I was skeptical? I didn't want to believe it, but I truly dug in and truly came to that conclusion.
Well, welcome back to the Finding Something Real podcast, friend. This is your host, Janelle Wood, and we are so glad that you are watching or listening here as we wrap up season 8 of the Finding Something Real podcast. I am very excited about our guest today, but before we introduce him, I am joined by 2 of my favorite co-hosts, and of course, all 8 of them are my favorites, but I am very, very blessed to be joined by both Sarah and Katelyn today. Welcome, ladies. How are you doing?
Thank you. Doing good.
It's Wednesday.
Woohoo! And when this airs, it'll be Wednesday, so that's perfect. Katelyn, how did you end up on this call today? How did you end up here?
I think your words were, we ambushed her. So, again, cannot say no. You said please, like that's the magic word.
You answered the phone call. Sarah.
I made the mistake.
So a little behind the scenes situation here. Before every episode, I send out text messages or WhatsApp messages to all of the girls that have been involved this season, and there's 8 of them. And Katelyn, you're the only one that I have to make special accommodations for in the sense that I send it over WhatsApp. And so because you're in the UK, which is far away. And so I always make that extra effort. And then I can see because WhatsApp does it when it delivers, but I didn't know because you didn't respond. So then Sarah and I were sitting here and we had, we were talking about how excited we were for this conversation. And I said, you know what? You should just call Katelyn. She goes, do it. And so we did. And you were like, sure, why not?
Yes.
So today on the Finding Something Real podcast, we have a returning guest. He reminded me it's been a couple of years. Rick Allan, welcome to the Finding Something Real podcast.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, Rick, it's been a while. What have you been up to? And I know that you do apologetics, but for somebody who isn't familiar with that term, that was a funny way to say doesn't, who isn't familiar with that term, would you explain what it is and what you do?
Yeah, I myself, when I first heard apologetics, thought, what are you apologizing for, right? And I always wish we could use a different term, but that's what it is. It's apologetics, which is giving a defense. It's a Greek term. So it's giving a defense for what you believe and why you believe it. So apologetics is just saying the belief I've come to after my investigation. I can give you a little background if you want now. Yeah.
Yeah. That's part of the reason we wanted to have you on, Rick, because if I remember, so you and I met, correct me if I'm wrong, at Cross-Examine Instructors Academy, just like Aaron Baumgartel last week. And what was fascinating to me about your story is that you weren't always a Christian, not at all. And then I had you on as a guest, and I don't remember the details, but I remember thinking, wow, that was a really interesting conversation. And now you go around the world, if I remember correctly, even overseas, talking with people about why you believe the Christian faith is true. So yeah, we want to hear your story. That's a big part of why we'd love for you to share.
Yeah. Well, I grew up, in the usual house in the US with just nominal Christianity. We went to church sometimes, but never read a Bible at home or anything like that. It was just kind of something you did. Kind of a funny story. We were going to a Methodist church, and my brothers and sisters had to get confirmed just as part of what they did in that Methodist church. Then my parents stopped going, and I didn't have to get confirmed. And my brothers and sisters are very angry about that. But I never had to be confirmed, and we stopped going to church. And I met my wife in college. She was a Christian, but not a practicing Christian. Kind of the same thing, really, I guess. So we got married in a Christian church, but I never thought about it. It was nothing I even cared about. It wasn't part of my life. Just really, I guess you could say I was an agnostic at that time, where I didn't really think about it. Didn't really think about it very much. Then a few years into my marriage, my wife, as I say, found Jesus. So somebody talked to her and got her into it, and she realized that Jesus was this person and she needed to have a relationship, and she went off in that direction. And I was pretty angry about it, honestly, because I thought it was going to take all our fun away. It's not what I signed up for. And so she was off doing this Christian thing, and I was moving more towards there isn't a God. I don't want there to be a God. This is not what I signed up for again.
Rick, can I interject
Yeah,
there and just ask
yeah,
you a follow-up to
you
that?
bet.
If you had grown up kind of going to church, what was your problem with Christianity? Did you have one? Did you feel like it was problematic or?
I didn't have a problem with it. It just wasn't something for me. I thought it was a religion like every other religion, which means it's made up. It's just wishful thinking. It's what people want to believe. Um, I didn't even at the time, anyways, see it as even a useful. There's a lot of things now. As we get into this, I'll probably tell you a lot of things I didn't know that I know now. I didn't think it was very useful. So yeah, I
Mhm.
really just wasn't anything, honestly.
Did you feel like there was anything missing in your life when your wife had a Jesus experience?
Um, no. So part of my story is I was a pretty rebellious kid. Got into a lot of things, and I felt that that's just the way you lived. I was comfortable. I really was. I think I was comfortable at the time.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then your wife gets involved in this and you're upset because you think she's not going to be fun anymore. What made
Well,
you think that she wasn't going to be fun anymore?
because she was going to be a Bible thumper, she was going to start preaching on the corner and trying to convert people, and that was, it's just like that just was my impression of what Christianity was. It was just, you get the preachers, the millionaire preachers are pushing people over on the stage. People are, just wanting this to be true. Yeah.
Yeah. Had you, one more question on that.
Yeah.
Had you seen hypocrisy firsthand? Had you seen things that were ugly about Christianity beyond it just being wishful thinking?
That's a great question. Never thought about that before. There's nothing that pops in my head about it other than I thought the whole thing was hypocritical. I thought, you know, people are doing this, a lot of them for money, right? Especially the preachers on TV, they're doing it for money. So that part of it was hypocritical to me.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you have a problem. Your wife has gotten into something weird. Okay.
Yes, I have a problem. And she and she kept it from me. She knew I didn't like it. So she didn't really keep it with me. So the story then proceeds, and we end up having kids. I have twins, a boy and a girl, and it was they're about 2 years old, and my sister actually said, "You need to support your wife. You married her. You have kids. You need to support her. You need to go to church with her and support her." So okay, I'll do that. That's what I'm supposed to do. So I went to church with her. I hardly ever listened. I was usually just paying attention to something else. But what ended up happening is this group came into my church called Life Action. It was a traveling group, and I went with my wife to say it, and they said something that struck me pretty hard. They said you need to raise your kids and you need to teach them good morals. And they talked about some of the things that are bad morals. I'm like, oh, I did that. Wait, what am I gonna teach my kids? They're gonna be teenagers, and I don't like hypocrites, so I don't want to be a hypocrite and say you should do this, even though I did that, right? And I had this sense that what I did was wrong. I don't want my kids to do that, but what am I going to teach them? So that was my dilemma. That was a spark where I said I got to figure some of this stuff out. Um, whose opinion am I going to use? There are so many opinions out there about how you should behave. Who am I going to do it? And then it struck me that this Jesus character, who I've listened to a few times, he preached a moral system, and there's this claim that he was God. And if he was God, then that would be an objective moral standard to point to. And that's what started me on the journey, which I call a skeptic's journey. That said, I got to figure this out. I got to prove this right or wrong. I got to know, because even though I'm a skeptic about everything, I was never skeptical about what I believed, as far as there was no God.
Hmm.
So it was a good 3 to 4 years studying, reading. Now back then there was no phones. So literally I would
There were
get
phones. There
podcasts.
were no screen, no smartphones,
Let's
maybe.
see. I'm not even sure. Well, there were no smartphones. Yeah, maybe just
Yeah.
the flip phones had started to come out.
Yeah.
There
Got a
were no
BlackBerry?
screens on the phones. So
A
I would
BlackBerry.
literally burn podcasts of like Ravi Zacharias. I would burn those onto a CD so I could listen to them in my drive, put them in my car, and listen to the podcasts on my drive. But there was no YouTube, there was no video or anything like that. So it was all
Right.
reading and listening.
Okay. So were you always super logical like that? Like wanting to prove things?
Super skeptical, yeah. I'm super skeptical about pretty much anything. Someone will say something like, "Really? No, I gotta check it out for myself before I believe anything, really."
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, before you go into what you found, I'm
Yeah.
just curious what Katelyn and Sarah are taking from the story. So we'll start with Sarah.
Sorry, my dog is chewing her bone. Okay. So yes, thank you for sharing that already. I'm curious to hear with you saying that you were skeptical. What gave you the grounding looking into Christianity that it was something that you could be confident in instead of continuing just like there's a lot of things that you find in Christianity that you want to be true and that you can believe are true, but that you still have questions around. And you have to experience them to make them true in your life, instead of just like continuing the questions forever.
They do continue. They do
Yeah.
continue. That is true.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you think, Rick? You want to answer that right now, or do you want to give Katelyn a turn? Because we'll get to Katelyn in a second. Do you want to answer Sarah there?
Can you reframe the question a little? Because I'm not sure I got the question.
Sure. So, well, and I think it'll just continue with your story of what you started to look into, like what were your big questions in trusting that God was real and that Christianity was real, and then what gave you the confidence to believe them instead of continuing the questions, because
Gotcha.
a lot of them are like maybe 80% trustworthy, or different numbers you could go off of.
Yeah. So you're jumping to the conclusion right now,
Mm-hmm.
which is fine. So when I give my talks, I have my little introduction, which is kind of what I did there. And then I give all the evidence and stuff. And then I come back to, well, how did I process that evidence? And how did I use that evidence? And just so you know, when I started this, I didn't want to believe, right? I was more on the I'm going to prove this wrong than I was on I'm going to prove it right. I wanted to kind of show it that way because I didn't believe it was true. So listening to those books, you get to a point. You'll see in my background, I have some law enforcement in my background, and as well as firefighting, and I just got to a point where the evidence was overwhelming. It wasn't 100%. It wasn't beyond the reasonable doubt, as the jury instructions will say. It was beyond a reasonable doubt, but it wasn't beyond all doubt, right? It wasn't beyond all possible doubt. And I got to that, and I remember I used to go camping with a college friend every year, and he was from college, and that's when I was not a Christian, and he wasn't a Christian, and so we would have some fun times camping. And I'd go camping. I was camping with him over this progression, and where I really changed one night, I was sitting around a campfire, and I'm arguing to him why Christianity is true. And I looked up at the stars and I went, "Oh my gosh, you think this is true?" That's when the change happened for me. I actually got baptized a couple months later, but it was that night when I realized, oh my gosh, you've gone to the other side. You think this is true. And so it was a progression. where the points just kept coming. We can get into any of those points. I started with God. Is there even a God? And the evidence around God, because I didn't even think there was a God. I was very naturalistic, very materialistic in my thinking. So I went through a lot of the evidence there, got to a point where I'm like, yeah, this is beyond nature and materials. There's something else here. And that's what took me to religions. And then I went into religions, looked at Christianity, and the evidence, we can get into any of the evidence you want if we want to talk about that. Not sure where we want to go with it, but yeah, did that answer your question?
Katelyn, I'm curious your feedback for Rick right now.
I mean, it's always been cool to hear about, because we've had a couple of people that I've been able to sit with, of people moving on from like atheist or agnostic to believers. So it's always interesting to hear about the progression. Um, I am interested, not to like get into specifics, but like we had talked about it before, of like what evidence would look like. So I'm always interested to see like what's evidence for you, because for some people it's having visions or like conversations, some people it's the historical side. So interested in like what it looks like to you. That was one of the many tipping points, I'm sure, that kind of led you to look up to the stars and go, oh shit.
I don't think we should edit that out.
That's okay.
No, I love
It's been a long day of talking to children.
No, Katelyn. It's so real. It's so real. And we'll just put a little disclaimer. I love it.
So one of the things that changed with me, so I have a long list of things that changed. I stopped drinking. I didn't stop drinking. What am I saying? I changed my playlists. I changed the movies I watch. I changed my language. And it's just kind of the progression of what I wanted to do. And I laugh at that little swear word, because I happened to go back, I don't know what, sometime I was making a anniversary thing for my wife, and I found some letters I wrote her in college. And I could not believe how many swear words were in that letter that I wrote her. So just a kind of side thing there. What amazed me was science was one of the biggest things that led me to believe there was a God. And I would have never guessed that when I was starting this. I would think of anything, science would push me away from it, right? And when I started getting into the science of the DNA, I started getting into intelligence, the fine-tuning of the world, the evidence around what we're made of and how intricate it is and how hard that we can't even come close to producing what's in our bodies. The Big Bang, everything, in the last 100 years, the science that's come out that's pointing to there's more than nature and materials. There has to be. DNA was a huge one for me. Oh my gosh, the intricacies. I'm a computer programmer, right? And so when I program in my languages, it ends up going down to bits, zeros and ones. Everything we're running here, everything runs on zeros and ones. That's the code, 0, 1, in different sequences. And so that's computer programming. Now you go look at the DNA. There's a 4-letter code there, A, C, T, and G. 4-letter codes, 3 billion long, in a certain sequence, so that our cells and different parts of our body can work off of that program. To me, anyways, to believe that came from nature, from natural selection on its own, it just was beyond what I could believe. And that's just the DNA. So then I go on to the other evidence and the other science. So science was actually a really big one for me. I was like, oh, wow, science is pointing towards something more. Then I do get into the supernatural stuff, right? The near-death experiences are fascinating to me. The fact that we have a desire for an afterlife, and I put that against my naturalism, and I said, well, wait, shouldn't I just want to procreate and do all this other stuff and live for this life? This is all there is. But almost everybody thinks there's an afterlife, that there's something else. Why would that? Where those two don't fit together? So we have the supernatural, we have the near-death experiences, we have the fact that we have a mind that isn't the same as our body, the chemicals. It's just so outlandish that way. And then finally, I looked at evil and suffering, and back to my moral argument, back to morals, that I can't justify evil and suffering if there isn't a God. if we are just nature and materials, it doesn't matter what I do. It doesn't matter what people do, because we're just nature. We're just like the lion eating the cub. It doesn't matter. Does the lion eat a cub? No. The lion probably doesn't eat their own cub. They eat a bunny. When the lion eats the bunny, right, we don't think about it, right? That's just nature. But when we do something, we think about it. So those two just don't mix. So that's what really, all those things together, totality of that evidence, put me over the edge that there's something beyond this world. We can call that a God, you can call it whatever you want, but it's something beyond us.
I mean, again, it's always cool hearing about it because I feel the same way a lot of the time of like the idea of like not being able to believe in stuff of like I'm kind of like I cannot believe that we're anything but nature, I guess, but I've never really put that much thought into specifically nature. So it's cool hearing about like the connections to that. I'm sure I've started being a good podcaster and I'm gonna try to take notes this time, but I've just started this session, so I'll be more productive later on in the hour.
Katelyn is a literature teacher. She loves literature and she's an amazing educator. So if you have good books, Rick, that you were reading along the way, you never know. Katelyn, maybe you'll read them. I know I might. So
I do have the name from the last woman somewhere on my desk.
C.S. Lewis. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Somewhere. I'm gonna write that down again.
He's a hard read. C.S.
Lewis is a hard read.
Yeah. I think really good, and I love his story of being an atheist as well and becoming a Christian, and really impactful things he writes about. But it's not just regular English to me anyways. And so it takes a lot of thought. His the book Letters, this is a book I read, Letters to a Skeptic, which is really good. But the one I was thinking about was what's the one, Wormwood, with C.S. Lewis?
The Screwtape Letters.
Screwtape Letters. Yes. That takes a lot of thought, but it was really interesting to me to think, if there's bad spirits, if there's other spirits, what would they be thinking? What would they be doing? And so that was a really good book. I liked I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist from Frank Turk. I'm sure that's probably come up before. And J. Warner Wallace, of course, was a big impact in my his Cold Case Christianity came out right when I was in this phase. And so that hit the spot for me from an evidence, from an eyewitness perspective, from a law enforcement's perspective. That was really impactful for me.
Rick, would you mind sharing, maybe in a little more detail, how you went from this place of, I don't want there to be a God, to, I think there really is one. You talked about the DNA, but what else was it for you? Do you remember some aha moments where you were like, wait a second, this doesn't align with my naturalistic perspective here?
Yeah, I wouldn't say there were aha moments. It just kept building. I have a little thing I call the smell test, where something just doesn't smell right. I use the example is a gallon of milk, and you smell the milk, like, well, I don't need to drink it. I know that's bad. It's a smell test. And I started thinking of that in that metaphor, that analogy of a smell test, where I'm reading these atheists, and when they're saying things, I'm like, well, wait, that doesn't really make sense. I'm not sure I believe that. There's a lot of quotes from Richard Dawkins and Francis Crick about, that DNA has the illusion of design, that it looks like it was designed. And I kept reading these things, and I'm going, well, wait, if something looks like it, maybe it is, and I started seeing, on the atheist side, I started feeling like they weren't being honest with the evidence, I think is the best way to say it. So yeah, that was the DNA side. I'm sorry, that was the God side, the evidence for God side. All those things I talked about just kind of came together. It wasn't an earth chat. It wasn't like, oh, I believe in God, everybody. It just was, yeah, I think there's a God. Then I turned my attention to the religions, right? Because now, okay, I think there is a God. So now there's all these religions and there's different versions of God and what he's like and which one's true. Are any of them true? And so then I started looking at Christianity and the other religions to decide, do any of these give a truthful thing of what God might be? And I can get into some of that. Yes.
Yeah.
What other religions did you look into?
Well, I looked into the main ones. Obviously, there's probably, I don't know how many thousands there are, right? So, I looked into the Muslims, I looked into Judaism, the Baha'i faith, all the top ones, and kind of looked at what they all fell down pretty quickly. And I'll tell you why. Because when I look at Christianity, when I look at the founders of Christianity, the disciples, Jesus of Christianity, and I look at their behavior, I look at what they did, and I compare that to any other religion and the behavior of the founders and what they were after, to me, it's worldly different, completely different, right? The disciples didn't have money, they didn't have the power, they weren't going after sex. Whereas you look at Mormonism, you look at Muslims, not Muslims in general, but Muhammad and some of the behaviors that they did in those religions, I think it's a stark contrast between them. And Christianity was radical in what they were teaching, completely different than any other religions. And you wouldn't just do that for a lie. And so that's why cold case Christianity was such a huge thing for me in the eyewitness testimony, looking at eyewitnesses, looking at how you can test them, and then looking at the motive and the behavior of those eyewitnesses compared to the other religions is what really set it apart. For the religions that believe in God, right? I had come to the conclusion there was a God. And there's a number of religions that don't believe in God. So those would be excluded from the beginning. So it only, it brings down to the main ones that believe in a God.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Katelyn, I'm sure you've got more, but I'm going to jump to Sarah here and see, Sarah, if you have anything to follow up with.
Yeah, I'm just having a question come up. I'm wondering about kind of emotionally how it was for you to want to put things in order, like have your beliefs figured out and put them into a box of like Christianity is what I'm going to believe now and follow that. Was that easy for you? Did you want to do that, or how does it feel now with having that like settled in your heart and mind versus continuing the questions like we said?
Yeah. I'm still not sure I want it. I mean, that's the truth, right? It's hard. There's a lot of things you don't want to do or that it kind of teaches. There's a lot of things in life though that we do that we don't want to do, right? And that's the thing. When I find it hard, those are the things I kind of come back to. Well, I went to college. I really didn't want to go to college and study hard, but there was a reason to do that, right? I maybe don't want to do the speed limit, but there's reasons I'm going to do that. Well, it's the same thing, in my opinion, anyways, for Christianity, where it's, yeah, I don't really want to do some of these things, but I believe it's true. And if it's true, there's reasons to do this, whether it's rewards or whether it's, being forgiven of our sins and that kind of a thing. So my reluctancy to convert or to go into Christianity was strong, right? It took a lot and a long time. And then when I gave in and I got baptized, and I kind of went all in, and I did small groups, and I did that because not necessarily because I wanted to, because I felt it was the right thing to do based on what I thought. And then I got really skeptical again, and I thought, maybe there's new evidence out there. Maybe there's something I can find that I don't have to do this anymore. So this was about 3-4 years after I got baptized. So I went back in and I studied again, and I started listening to things, and I get to the point where, if you're listening to books or you're listening and you're like, I've heard that before, you get to where it seems kind of repetitive, where you've heard it before. That's where I got to again. I'm like, I'm not learning anything new here. I still have the struggles. I still maybe don't want to do this, or well, is that really true? But the evidence hasn't changed. How am I going to apply that evidence, right? What's going to be my explanation for the evidence? I mean, that's the other big thing I learned through it is the evidence is out there for all of us to look at, right? There's nothing new if you want to go search it. The atheists who believe there is no God, and the Christians or whatever religion it is believe there is a God, same evidence. It's A, have you looked at the evidence, and B, how do you interpret the evidence? Because it's the same evidence no matter who it is. And so I just got to a point where I was like, I have to follow this because it's true. And I have to speak about it. I go out and I speak about it now because I believe it's true. And this is the way I convey my belief to other people, is by speaking about what convinced me that it's true intellectually, right? It's the emotional side that for someone like me is hard. Intellectual side, I can read things, I can learn things, but now I have to really become emotional about it. I have to apply it. Is difficult for people like me.
Sarah's nodding. I feel like you can relate a little bit, Sarah. Yes.
Yes, yeah, it's a struggle, yeah, because even when you think that you've landed on the truth, that means that you're now supposed to follow it. And yeah, it's not always what feels the most fun or comfortable.
Absolutely. Totally agree.
So if it was up to your feelings, you wouldn't be a Christian. Is that true, Rick?
Oh, that's a good question. That's tough. If it wasn't for my feelings, I would. Well, no. If it wasn't for the evidence, I wouldn't be a Christian. Right? It's what it comes down to. It was the evidence. It was the intellectual side that said, this is true. You need to believe it.
So there is a difference, though, between that intellectual assent to, I think that this is true, and I now need to follow it, versus a personal relationship with Jesus. So what did you find about Jesus, and how does that anchor you, or does it? Does that relationship anchor you?
Yeah, I think I get this question every Q&A. After I talk, I do Q&A, and I get this question all the time emotionally. And a lot of people struggle with my answer when I say the emotional side is the toughest side for me, right? I wish I could have this relationship with Jesus and with God where he talked to me every day. That's what I wish. But emotionally, I don't get that. Now, whether there's a reason for that, I don't know. One of the things that helped me in that problem where I was like, well, wait a minute, there's this Bible. I believe this Bible. I believe it was written, and I believe it's from God. If God, who's way more powerful than me, chooses to communicate with me personally through the Bible, through words, versus talking to me, who am I to say that's wrong, or I'm not going to accept that, right? If for whatever reason I had a relationship with someone who was mute, for example, they couldn't talk, right? So I couldn't have that version of a relationship with them, but they could write things down and I could have a conversation. I could have a meaningful relationship with them that way. That's the way I think about it with God. And I also too sometimes believe he doesn't give me that strong emotional relationship because it causes me to continue to be skeptical and to continue looking at things so I can be current and present them in my presentations, right? So I'm always got a little bit of skeptical there because what if I miss something? I'm gonna keep looking. But I haven't missed anything. So, but I think that might be part of the reason too. A lot of people, when I say that, I don't have that relational side struggle with that, but I'm like, well, I can't change what I don't have, right? There's been a few times in my life, and it's usually around speaking or something, where God has clearly spoken to me, who's clearly put something and said, this is the way I want you to go. This is the door I'm going to open for you. But on a daily relationship side, it's more intellectual.
Curious what that looks like then for you, because like in John 17:3, where Jesus said, "This is eternal life, that they would know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ whom you have sent." That word gnoskos is that intimate knowing, like between a husband and a wife. What does abiding, another word that Jesus talked about, right? To abide with him, we will bear fruit. What does that look like for you then, as somebody who is more intellectual minded and who doesn't audibly hear from God? What does that look like for you on a daily basis?
I guess the best way I can say that is it's kind of like where I talked about the college thing where you're going to go through school, you're going to do things for a reward. I do feel the same way with this, where it's like, I'm going to follow the word. I'm going to follow what I believe Jesus says we should do, because I'm a Christian and because I believe it's true. So I read the Bible. I serve a lot at my church, and I try to follow what Jesus prompts me to do, which again is speaking, which I never thought in the wildest dreams I'd be out speaking in front of crowds of hundreds. I'm like, I never spoke before 2018. That's when I first did my first speaking. So it's really following, I think, the path that he's laid out for me, and making sure that what I do, because you have another side in you, right? You have the devil in you. You have spirits in you that are going to try to tell you to do this or try to do this. So always testing things, testing those feelings against, is that a God feeling or is that another spirit feeling? And so doing a lot of testing, using the Bible, right? Using the word of the Bible to test, am I following the direction I should be following?
One more question, and then I want to get back to Katelyn in case she has something. But you mentioned briefly other religions. And I've heard a pastor describe that every other religion is a hill or a ladder to climb, and Christianity is a cross to die on. When you're talking about all the things that you do, how is that different than other religions that say you need to do things in order to earn a good standing before God? What is the difference, Rick?
Yeah, well, the truth is, in Christianity, it's not what you do, right? It's not how you obey. It's not how you work. It's the gift. I strongly believe in the gift of grace, the gift of Jesus, that Jesus has given us the gift of salvation, right? If we believe in Jesus, then we do have the gift of salvation. But I also believe there's some talks in the Bible about rewards in heaven, right? And that's where I do believe, what you do can set up yourself for rewards in heaven. But you don't have to do those things to go to heaven. It's just the gift of grace. It's the gift of salvation. And that's another thing that's different with all the other religions, right? You have these things you have to do. You have these things you have to obey. Or there's a lot of secretive practices, things we're not going to tell you about. Don't tell anyone, that kind of a thing. So Christianity is only the one that boils down to the fact that Jesus died for us because we're sinners, right? But excuse me. Excuse me a minute. Unfortunately, I had COVID about 2 years ago. And ever since I had COVID, I start to lose my voice sometimes, which is terrible as a speaker. Like right now. So you can see it's starting to go a little bit, but it'll come back. So let me see if there's other questions while I recover my voice.
Yeah, Katelyn, here's your chance. Ask him anything you want about what he just shared. Because one of the things I remember when we were recording at the beginning of the season, Katelyn, you had asked, so what makes Christianity the right religion? And I mean, you briefly talked a little bit about that, but I'm curious, Katelyn, if you want to add on to that at all based on what Rick shared.
I mean, I guess it's of course good to hear that there was research done and applied to all kinds like the big ones, the top guys. Um, but I guess it's just kind of coming from a standpoint of like to be a speaker for what you believe in is like great to like stand up what you believe in. That's what everybody should do, whatever it is that it is. I guess, and Janelle and now Sarah is probably sick of hearing me say it, like in not a disrespectful way.
Oh, no.
But like I cannot help but hear entitlement when I hear that like Christianity is the one truth when there are millions of other people who say the exact same thing against all other religions and against Christianity, against everyone, and then this one against all that one plus that one, so on and so forth, and everybody is just living their own truth. Who are we as people to say, you're wrong, we're right, and because of that, we get to go up to heaven and enjoy those rewards if we've done what we needed to do while you've dedicated your life to your truth, and it's going to end in not so pleasant ways in your afterlife. I use it not again, not in a disrespectful way.
It wasn't disrespectful at all. And that's exactly, I'm so glad that you asked that. Rick, how would you answer it?
Well, trying not to be disrespectful myself, that sounds emotional to me, right? And I talk, about emotions overruling evidence, right? I had a lot of strong emotions too. I didn't want this to be true. I don't want, right? But emotions have nothing to do with truthfulness, right? And so when I look at the religions, and they're all can't be right because they all make exclusive claims. So if you believe in truth, that something has, it's either true or it's not. I don't care if I like it or not. 2 + 2 = 4. I can say I don't like that. I think that's wrong. Well, it doesn't matter. It's true. You can apply the same thing to religions because they all make exclusive claims. And so only one of them can be true. They can all be wrong, and you can go that route. Or you look at the evidence and you say one of them is true, even if I don't like it, which, like I said, I didn't like it in the beginning, right? I don't want this to be true. It doesn't change the fact that it's true. So that entitlement, I hear you. I felt the same way, right? But that doesn't mean it's not true. And how you process that emotionally is different for everybody, but I still believe it's true. So if you look at the
When
other,
we're
there's the big one.
talking,
You go ahead. You go.
no, you go on.
I was just going to say the other religions. The big thing is just about Jesus. And they all say something different about Jesus. Was he crucified? Was he not crucified? Was he the Messiah? And so Jesus had to be one of those. He can't be all of them. So one of the religions can be right or they're all wrong. I could get into that a little more if you want, but let me hear I want to hear what you were gonna ask.
I'm talking about like it sounds emotional, and when we're talking about evidence and like the research you've done, like history-based, person-based, whatever kind of basis it is, and you're talking about how people interpret that evidence, because evidence, it is kind of, we can say that history is history and it made out one way, but the way that it's interpreted is entirely up to the person. Are interpretations of truth not tied to emotions? The way that people interpret evidence is who they are, however they believe. But like when we're talking about evidence being interpreted the one way, if interpretations are not tied to emotions, what could they be tied to?
That's a great question. It's a great way to think about it. Honestly, because you brought up history. In history, I definitely would. History is much more interpretive, right? Because there's going to be different interpretations of historical documents, historical things like that. Then there's the science side of things, and that's a little less interpretation. But you're right, even some of that is interpretation. But at some point, you get to where something has to be true or it's not. It's just the way it is, right? Either 2 + 2 = 4 or it doesn't. And if you can show that it's true, I don't know if that's really answering your question, because you bring up a good point that you have to interpret evidence. You have to think of things to be true. So I'm not actually sure how a good way to answer that question, because it's a really good one. And I'm going to actually take some time to think about that one. Yeah, that was good.
Yeah.
Especially, the laws of nature and the things that we've discovered, you can look at some things and you can say they're true or not, just based on equations and things like that. But you're right on the historical stuff. That's interesting.
Man, there's a bunch of follow-up questions to that. Sarah, what have you got?
I'm just trying to follow what you're saying, Katelyn, because I'm wanting to think about that too. You're saying that feeling, emotion is tied to how we interpret the evidence that we're looking at, right?
Yeah, I mean, how people look at things. There's the color of an apple, and it's going to be the color of an apple, but they literally see different colors, so the truth is different for every person. Same way that I assume it's applied to religion and someone's personal faith of, well, if I see this apple is red, who am I to say that other person who sees if they're a different shade of red, they see it as that shade of red.
Right.
Who am I to say it's different if it's my personal view of it versus their personal view of it? I'm not going to look at them and say you're wrong. That's objectively the truth. It's more so the interpretation, I guess, and how it's tied. Maybe. I just keep talking.
No, it's good. Yeah, that's a really good question.
I mean, really the question maybe is there objective truths, right? Mm-hmm. Objective versus subjective. And, I guess it depends how far you want to take it, because we could all be in the Matrix, right? And we could be. There's no way to really prove we're not. So I guess there's a leap of faith sometimes, right? That we're not in the Matrix, that I am who I am. I'm a human. I have a mind, I have a body, I have a soul. And that is, you can argue that's a faith argument, right? But how far do you take that? I mean, at some point you got to say, yeah, but that's true, right? I think that's true. Even though anyone could argue and say, well, no, you're in the Matrix, so it's not true. And you can't really prove that differently, right? So I guess I would say there is a point where you have to admit there's objective truth and live your life that way.
Well, Rick, wouldn't you say that even though we all experience like what Katelyn was saying, like my truth, right, which is subjective, right? Like I might look at your shirt right now and say you're wearing a blue shirt, and Sarah might say, well, it looks black to me, right? Objectively, your shirt is a certain color, mm-hmm. right? Even if my interpretation of it, like it's true whether I believe it or not. That's an objective truth, right? And so if there is a God, it's true whether I believe it's true or not, if there actually is a God. And if Jesus Christ really did die on a cross for our sins, or die on a cross and rise again, and that's an objective truth claim. And it's true whether I believe it or not, right? And so I get what Katelyn, you were saying about like history and things are interpreted through the lens of our subjective whatever. But there's also objective truth that we're responsible. Even if I say there is no cliff somewhere and I run towards the cliff and I fall off the cliff, I could be screaming the whole way down, there was no cliff, but there's still a cliff. You know what I'm saying? So there's certain objective truths that I feel like have consequences if we pretend that they don't exist. And if the claims in the Bible are true, there are consequences to not knowing those truths, even if we say that they're not true. Am I making sense? I'm not a huge logic person, but I do know a little bit about objective and subjective truth, and I'm just seeing if I'm figuring this out right. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm with you in that. I'm not, that's not my strong suit, that area, right? But yeah, what you said I think is true.
Objectively speaking.
It's objectively true.
Yeah.
Then I think you end up with Pascal's wager of like, I'm just gonna choose to trust this because it is the greatest reward and the lowest risk. But then you actually experience a relationship with God. And I think that that adds a lot to your confidence in what you think is true. At least it has for me.
Mm. Sarah, did you
Yeah.
feel like that's what you ended up doing? The Pascal's wager thing? Because
Choosing it. I mean, at times it felt that way, yeah. Like I'm just gonna continue this because I think it's probably the best option. But I think now I would say that there's a lot more to it than that.
yeah. Oh no, Katelyn, did I misrepresent what you were saying there?
Oh, I don't think so. It was just more continuation of it. Yeah, digging deep in stuff like that. The idea of like the Bible saying that there are just consequences to your beliefs, your actions, and it like circles back to that idea of like so does every other Bible. So it's either all one of them, none of them, and like it kind of drives me nuts, but also I try not to think about it too hard of like subjectively we cannot, not subjectively, like, oh, okay, now we're talking such exact word choices. We won't know until it's over, right? So no pressure.
Well, but it's also, it begs the question, how important is it to look into these things, right? Like
To each
if
their own truth, right?
right, well, I mean, we can be like what you were saying, Rick, like your life was fine until you were confronted with, wait a second, this is messing with my life a little bit. So I want to look into it. And then you found an inconvenient truth for yourself that then you're dealing with. And I'm thinking that was a divine intervention in your life. But, I think, like you said, we all have the same evidence when we go outside. And the Bible talks about that, about how all creation speaks of something creating that. There's like a giant question mark. I don't know. What would you say, Rick? We're going to wrap up here in a couple minutes, but what would you say to somebody who's sitting there going, wait a second, if there is objective truth and I don't know it, and all these different religions make these truth claims that are objective, whether they're true or not, like how do you even start? Because like Katelyn was saying, there's millions of religions out there.
Yep. While you were talking, I was thinking in my head, I'm like, why are we having this conversation? Why are the four of us in here having this conversation about something we can't see, touch, or smell? Why has civilization since the dawn of time, I mentioned this earlier, looked at an afterlife, talked about religions, talked about spirits, talked about, there's just an overwhelming, to me, an overwhelming evidentiary thing that there's more to this life because we all think it. Humanity has thought it first. And again, I come back to, if we're nature and materials, there's no reason to be thinking there's something beyond this world. So why do we all think that? Why are we talking about it? Why? It's almost evidence in itself that there is something more. So now you got to decide, well, do I ignore that? Or do I seek it and try to figure out what is that something more? And I'm going to go off on a tangent here, but I do come back to what was powerful for me too is the free will argument, that there has to be enough doubt, there has to be enough things out there to make me freely come to God. If I'm going to marry someone, I have to freely come to them. If they force me to, obviously I'm not going to love them. I'm not going to want to be there. So this is just a question, is there so many religions? Is there so much other opinions to give you that I really have to search this and I want it, and free will find it, kind of a thing? It's a little bit of a tangent. Does that make sense? kind of.
Yeah. I mean, I
It's a
think
different way to
so.
think about it.
But yeah, I'm curious. I mean, I've had people on this program who've talked before about when you're looking at all these different religions. J. Warner Wallace is somebody, Jim Wallace, I'm pretty sure he's said, like, look at Christianity. Look at it, because if it's not true, right? Like, move on. So what would you say to somebody who's like Katelyn, who's like all this stuff, and how can you even know? I don't know. Do you have any encouragement for that? Because I feel like it's kind of...
My encouragement's going to be evidence. It's going to be evidential. It's going to be look at the evidence for God, come to that conclusion. Is there not God? Look at it without bias, really look at it and say, is there more to this world besides nature and materials? Did the Big Bang happen? Is there something beyond us? Is there an intelligence beyond us? Which I definitely think there is. And then I think you have to take some time to look at the religions and decide. I'm with Jim Wallace too, in that, you know, if you look at Christianity, I think evidentially it stands quite far above the other religions. Otherwise I wouldn't be here, right? Why would I be here talking if I didn't believe that and I was skeptical? I didn't want to believe it, but I truly dug in and truly came to that conclusion. So you can either just decide to believe somebody, or, you know, I always say you're the jury, right? In this case, you're a one-person jury. There's evidence out there. There's science. There's history. There's evidence out there. There's explanations out there. You, as a one-person jury, should look at those explanations and decide if one is more evidentially true or not.
Rick, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. It's just an honor to hear your story and to hear what convinced you that Christianity is true. We have a final question on here. Finding something real is about finding restoration, eternity, authenticity, and love. In relationship with Jesus Christ, REAL is an acronym for restoration, eternity, authenticity, and love. Which of those things stands out to you the most in your life right now, and why?
Well, the first time you asked me that question a couple of years ago, it was authenticity for sure, just because of the evidential side. But I was actually thinking about this before this talk, and I'd probably go more to the eternity side now, where I'm really trying to absorb the meaning of that, of what eternity is, and just really reflecting on that and helping that live my life, that there is an eternity. So I would go with that. I hope I was helpful today. I will never be a debater. You'll never see me in a debate because I'm not quick on my feet, right? I'm like, oh, wait, let me go read that, right? So hopefully I answered your questions today and gave you some things to think about, knowing that I'll never be a debater. I don't know how people do that.
Okay. Well, first of all, number one, don't say never, because I found that never and always belong to God, and He has a way of having a sense of humor about those things.
Good point.
Number two, so brother, don't do that. Number two, if you ruminate on the question about objective, subjective things, and you want to email me following this conversation, and I can pass that along to Katelyn and Sarah, whoever else might be interested. Or we can include that information in the show notes. Go right ahead, Rick, because I know there's more to talk about there. But we did enjoy this conversation. I'm going to give Sarah and Katelyn an opportunity to say something about that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rick, for being here. I really appreciate your logical perspective and relate a lot to your story. So it's great to hear from you.
Great.
The more you talk, the more I swear I know your face, and it's been driving me nuts for like the last 20 minutes. So I really do appreciate it. I don't know. It's weird. I don't think I've seen you on a screen before. Did we? It's driving me nuts. So, anyways, it was nice. It was good. I have even more questions written down now.
Thank you so much, Rick Allan. Until next time.